The wind came hard across the Wyoming plains that morning, carrying dust against the windows of the Mercer ranch. Inside, 38-year-old Clara Mercer stood beside her kitchen table, staring at the folded paper in her trembling hands. It carried the sheriff's seal. Her husband was dead, and now the law wanted something she could never give. 3 riders had arrived before sunrise. Their horses were sweating, their coats covered in dust, and each man wore the silver badge of the county sheriff. The oldest rider stepped forward and told Clara that her late husband, Samuel, had left behind a debt to the Black River Cattle Company. If she did not sign over the ranch by sunset, Samuel's younger brother, Thomas, would hang for a murder he claimed he never committed. Clara's eyes narrowed. Thomas didn't kill anyone. The sheriff looked away. That's what the judge says, he replied. Your brother-in-law was found standing over a dead ranch hand, gun in his hand. Witnesses saw him running from the scene. Clara knew Thomas. He was hot-tempered, but he was not a murderer. Before she could answer, the sheriff placed another document on the table. Sign the ranch to Black River, he said, and Thomas walks free, refuse, and they hang him tomorrow morning. Clara looked toward the window. Beyond the glass stood her 2 sons, Caleb and Eli. Caleb was 23, broad-shouldered and quiet, while Eli was 19 and carried his father's stubborn courage. Neither son had said a word since the riders arrived. Then Clara heard the stable door slam. She turned. Both boys were already saddling their horses. Where are you going? She demanded. Caleb tightened his saddle strap. To find the truth. Eli checked the revolver at his belt. And if the truth is hiding behind somebody's bullet, we'll drag it into daylight. The sheriff stepped outside. Boys, this isn't your fight. Caleb looked him directly in the eyes. It became our fight when you threatened our family. The brothers mounted and rode west, following the trail toward the abandoned Red Creek Ranch where the murder had happened. Clara watched until the dust swallowed them. Then she returned to the kitchen and stared at the document on the table. She refused to sign. By noon, Caleb and Eli reached Red Creek. The place looked deserted, but Caleb noticed something strange near the barn. The dead ranch hand's horse was still tied behind the building. Its saddlebag had been removed, yet the leather straps were freshly cut. Eli crouched beside the dirt. Look here, there were hoofprints. 3 horses, he said. One was wearing a metal shoe on the left rear hoof. Caleb studied the tracks. The sheriff's horse has that mark. They followed the trail into the hills. 2 hours later, they discovered an old cabin hidden between cottonwood trees. Smoke rose from its chimney. Caleb raised a hand. Inside, they heard voices. The widow will sign tonight, one man said. And once the ranch is ours, nobody will care what happened to Mercer. Eli's jaw tightened. Caleb whispered, wait. Another voice answered, what about the boys? They're young, they'll learn what happens when they fight powerful men. Caleb recognized the voice. It belonged to Deputy Harlan, the sheriff's closest man. The brothers quietly moved around the cabin and found 3 men inside. On a table lay Samuel Mercer's old ledger, several letters, and a bloodstained pocket watch. Eli pointed toward the papers. That ledger belongs to Dad. Caleb's face hardened. Their father had always suspected Black River Cattle Company of stealing cattle from small ranchers. Before his death, Samuel had promised that he had proof. Then he died in what everyone called an accident. Now Caleb understood. His father had not discovered a simple cattle theft. He had discovered a scheme involving stolen brands, bribed officials, and murdered witnesses. The brothers waited until darkness, then slipped into the cabin and took the ledger and letters. But as they escaped, a floorboard cracked. Gunfire exploded behind them. They ran for their horses while bullets struck the trees. Eli suddenly stumbled. Eli, I'm fine. Blood soaked his sleeve, but he kept riding. They did not stop until they reached a canyon several miles away. There Caleb opened the ledger. Inside were names, dates, cattle brands, and payments made to the sheriff's office. At the bottom of the final page was a sentence written in their father's handwriting. If anything happens to me, Black River is responsible. Caleb stared at it silently. Eli breathed heavily. We need to get this to the judge. Caleb shook his head. The sheriff controls the judge. Then who do we trust? Caleb remembered something their father had once told him. When the law is bought, find the man who still fears God more than money. They rode toward Fort Laramie, where a federal marshal named Daniel Hayes was known for refusing bribes. But Black River had men everywhere. Before dawn, the brothers were ambushed near a narrow pass. Caleb was knocked from his horse. Eli fired twice, forcing the attackers back. Then a rifle cracked. Caleb felt the bullet tear through his coat. He rolled behind a rock and fired toward the ridge. One attacker fell, the others fled. By sunrise, the brothers reached Fort Laramie and found Marshal Hayes. They placed the ledger and letters before him. Hayes read every page. His expression changed. This is bigger than a ranch, he said. Caleb nodded. They're going to hang our uncle, not if this evidence is real. Back at the Mercer Ranch, Clara sat alone as sunset approached. The sheriff returned with 6 armed men. You have 1 hour, he said. Clara stood beside the unsigned document. No, the sheriff smiled coldly. Then your brother-in-law dies tomorrow. Clara looked at him without fear. You came here expecting a frightened widow. She folded the paper. You forgot I'm Samuel Mercer's wife. The sheriff's smile disappeared. Then from beyond the ranch gate came the thunder of horses. Caleb and Eli rode into the yard with Marshal Hayes and several federal deputies behind them. The sheriff reached for his weapon. Hayes drew first. Drop it. The sheriff slowly lowered his hand. Within minutes, Deputy Harlan confessed. Faced with the ledger, the letters, and the evidence recovered from the cabin, he admitted that Black River had arranged Samuel's death after he discovered their cattle theft operation. Thomas had been framed because he had threatened to expose them. The following morning, Thomas Mercer walked out of jail a free man. The ranch was not taken. The judge who had accepted Black River money was arrested, along with several company officials. The sheriff lost his badge and spent the rest of his life in prison. Weeks later, Clara stood on the porch watching her sons repair the western fence. Eli still had a bandage around his arm, while Caleb carried a scar from the bullet that nearly ended his life. Thomas sat nearby, laughing at something they had said. Clara looked across the land her husband had worked for 20 years. The ranch was still theirs, the house was still standing, and most importantly, her family was together. Caleb walked toward her and handed her a small wooden box. Inside was her husband's pocket watch. We found it in the cabin, he said. Clara held it against her heart. For the first time since Samuel's death, she smiled. You boys rode out because you thought you had to save this family. Caleb shook his head. No, Ma, we rode out because Dad taught us something. What was that? Eli grinned from behind him. That a Mercer never signs away his home when somebody else is trying to steal it. Clara laughed through her tears. The sun dropped behind the Wyoming mountains, turning the fields gold. The men who had threatened her believed a lonely widow would surrender. They were wrong. They had forgotten that behind every strong family stood someone willing to fight for it, and that Clara Mercer had raised 2 cowboys who would ride through hell itself before allowing their mother to stand alone.